After the divisions of the Civil War in Appalachia, peace was an elusive thing. The violence that happened during the war continued, with the North and the South replaced by rival families seeking to control resources, moonshine whiskey, or settle old slights, and new ones, to be honest with you, and gain political power. Thus, feuds, which happened from time to time in the mountains over the years, became more heated and more deadly. Today, we're going to tell the story of one such notorious feud that happened in Harlan County, Kentucky over 100 years ago. Hello, folks. I'm Steve Gilly, along with Rod Mullins, and this is Stories, a History of Appalachia.
Steve, I'm sure a lot of the listeners probably think, hey, if you're going to talk about feuds, you're probably talking about the Hatfields and McCoys. But folks, there were a lot of other feuds taking place across Appalachia during that time. The Hatfields and McCoys was just one of them. But they were everywhere, even leading up to the Civil War and after the Civil War. These things were going on full blast, and it was like, take no prisoners. There was a lot of killing, there was a lot of bloodshed, but these feuds really set in Appalachia big time.
Yeah, the post-Civil War period was a really rough period for the folks in parts of Appalachia. Mainly, I think, because of the divisions in the Civil War. You notice that most of the places where feuds were big, like Kentucky or West Virginia, were divided. When you look at the Hatfield-McCoy feud, that one gets all the press simply because, as we've said before, that master marketer named Devil Anse Hatfield.
That's right. And probably a little bit of help from William Shakespeare in there, too. I would have to say that probably with the Romeo and Juliet kind of motif with that, too. So
that is so true. But, we promised to do this one, and I've spent the last 2 or 3 months just getting this research together and trying to organize this because, like all these stories, particularly the feuds, there's 2 or 3 different versions of the story, but I think I've gotten this down to where it's pretty much the story.
Sometimes this information, sometimes information comes to you pretty quick. Now, Hatfields and McCoys, there's a lot of things that came to you that I wouldn't say it was all that easy, but with one like this one, you've got to really get down to the nitty gritty to find out what caused this feud and what happened between these families.
That's true. And folks, for clarity's sake, as we tell this story, we're going to be using modern names for the places we speak of today. For example, Harlan instead of Harlan Courthouse or Mount Pleasant. Now, Harlan can trace its history back to 1796. That's when Samuel and Chloe Howard settled there, having arrived with other settlers who passed through the Cumberland Gap. After Harlan County, named, by the way, after Kentucky pioneer Silas Harlan, was founded in 1819, Samuel and Chloe donated 12 acres for the new county seat, named for the small settlement of Mount Pleasant that was located nearby. And a little side note, Rod, during the period of Confederate occupation during the Civil War, the postmaster at Harlan renamed the town after himself. So for a short time, Spurlock, Kentucky existed as a Confederate town.
Wow. Well, Samuel Howard also built the first courthouse in Harlan, along with the first jail. He also built the public stocks and a whipping post near the jail for use in punishing wrongdoers. He also was the patriarch of the Howard family, consisting mainly of farmers and shopkeepers. Well, another founding family of Harlan County were the Turners, whose patriarch was William Turner, born in 1770 in all places of Virginia. He and his wife, Susanna, moved to Harlan County, where he built a large farm on Clover Fork. He also owned a tavern and 2 general stores in Harlan and became a leading citizen, and, he was quite well off.
William had a son, William II, born in 1812, and one of William II's sons was George Britton Turner, a large man, 6 feet 3 inches tall, weighing 350 pounds. George would be the main figure for the Turners in their feud with the Howards. In 1884, George Britton Turner, who was a trader, merchant, and had become a lawyer in Harlan County, built himself a very beautiful, fine home near the courthouse, which became known as the Turner Mansion. George was a leading citizen of Harlan County. But some of the Turners were said to have had a wild streak in the person of one of William II's younger sons, James Turner, known as Devil Jim. He and his brother William both had a vicious streak and were troublemakers, and one author of works on Eastern Kentucky feuds, C.A. Ballou, called the two, quote, demons of greed and ambition, end quote. During the Civil War, Devil Jim enlisted in the Union Army, but deserted halfway through his enlistment to form his own guerrilla company, of which he made himself the captain. And with this company, Devil Jim Turner terrorized Confederate sympathizers in the area with robbery, horse theft, and murder.
Boy, I'd like to go back and find a list of how many people nicknamed themselves Devil back in those times. Devil John Wright, Devil Jim in this case. Must have been a bunch of people like that. Well, after the Civil War, Devil Jim Turner and his men killed a man, William Middleton, on their way home. He was arrested and tried for the murder, and on December 5th, 1874, Devil Jim, his brother William, and a man named Francis Pace were convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Now, William died in prison. Devil Jim was put on parole and went to Washington State, of all places, where he ended up later having a stroke and fell into the fireplace and died from burns. Wow. Until the feud erupted, the Howard family was known as solid, peaceful, law-abiding citizens with no such stories to tell.
About the time George Turner built his fine home, Wilkerson Howard, known as Wicks, opened a store in Harlan, but closed it not long afterwards, claiming the Turner family was harassing his customers because Howard was competing with the Turner stores too well. Still, things were fairly calm, until a poker game changed all that. Wicks Howard was playing in that game, as was Bob Turner, also known as Little Bob Turner, son of George. Wicks and Bob got into an argument over the pot, each man accusing the other of cheating. Wicks himself later said that Turner was half drunk and had fallen asleep when another player set his hair on fire, causing him to come to rather quickly, I could well imagine that.
I can too, yes.
Bob accused Wicks of setting that fire and threatened to kill him, which resulted the next day in the two men meeting in Harlan and getting into a gun battle, with Turner shooting Howard in the arm and Howard returning fire with a shotgun, shooting Turner, leaving a fist-sized hole in his chest. Bob Turner died from the shotgun wound later that night in the Turner mansion. Wicks Howard immediately turned himself into the authorities. He was later tried and acquitted on the grounds of self-defense and allowed to go free.
Folks, the story doesn't end there. A few weeks later, Bob's brother, Little George Turner, and a boy named Bailey went to the Howard store and ordered Alice Howard, who was tending the business, not to sell whiskey to their father. In the process, Little George was very rude and he was rough with Alice Bailey. The next week, her son, Wills Howard, ran into Will Turner, Little Bob's brother, who was with a man named Bob Maupin on the road to Hagen, Virginia. An argument about his mother's treatment ensued, which ended with shots being fired, but none of the men were injured, at least physically. Well, that night, Will Turner came up to the Howard house and managed to sneak in, but was soon spotted by Wilk's wife. A gun battle ensued in the house. Will Turner was wounded, but he managed to escape. A few days later, he left, saying that he was going out west to get better.
Well, knowing trouble with the rest of the Turner family was coming, Wills and his mother sent for her brother, Will Jennings, who was then living in Indiana. Jennings came to help the family and would soon become part of the feud. And over the next 2 years, there was, certainly bad blood between the two families, but no further gun battles. But that was not the last. In the summer of 1887, Will Turner returned from Texas, sparking a cycle of violence in Harlan County. George Britton Turner had decided to settle the troubles with the Howards one way or another, so he sent a letter to the Howard clan informing them that
the bulldog of the Turners has returned with all of his teeth intact.
He then issued a challenge. The Howards should meet the Turners at the Harlan Courthouse that very day, quote, in open battle, and decide by blade and bullet who has the better right to rule the county, end quote.
Well, the Howards, understandably, didn't trust Turner, figuring that his men would be lying in wait for them at the courthouse. Not only that, but one of the Turner kin, Wilson Lewis, had been elected judge and was said to have wanted to get rid of the Howards as competitors in the whiskey business. In addition, Moses Turner had been elected Harlan County Sheriff. Well, a Howard family meeting was held, and it was decided to accept the challenge. The former sheriff and jailer, Barry Howard, warned that Judge Lewis would deputize gunfighters and occupy the courthouse, forcing the Howards to fight from the street, an unwinnable position. It was decided then that the Howard clan would ride into town early and set themselves up in good positions before the Turners could do so. Barry, Hiram, and James Howard were in the courthouse with Hezekiah Jennings. Wills, Alex, and Elijah Howard were across the street with Chad Hall and Bud Spurlock.
A dozen Turner men came out of the Turner mansion and walked casually toward the courthouse, unaware the Howard men were already there. Before they got there, though, one of the Turners spotted the Howards and called out an alarm. Soon downtown Harlan was alive with the sound of gunfire coming from both sides as an all-out gun battle began. Will Turner tried to rush the courthouse door but was shot in the abdomen. He was helped to the front porch of the mansion, screaming in pain from the gunshot wound. His mother, who was there, snapped at her son, telling him to die like a man, like little Bob did. Well, Will minded his mother and stopped screaming, and then died. Nobody else was killed that day, but 4 men were hit. Now, after things quieted down, the Turners returned to the mansion, and the Howards came out of the courthouse, then mounted their horses and rode on home. And for a short time, it was thought that, well, that might have been that. But Judge Lewis would have none of it, would he, Rod?
No, he wouldn't, because we're just getting started. He wrote letters to the editor condemning the Howard attack on the courthouse and the killing of Will Turner, and making his first plea to the governor of Kentucky for troops to save Harlan County from the outlaws. Judge Lewis made no effort to broker a truce between the families. Well, a few days later, Mrs. Hezekiah Jennings, Will Jennings' mother, along with Will, called on Mrs. Turner in an effort to end the violence. They walked up to her on the front porch of the mansion. In response, Mrs. Turner pointed at the blood where Will had died and replied,
"You can't wipe out that blood. Either the Turners will rule or the Howards, but not both."
In any event, an uneasy peace settled in for a few weeks after the encounter at the Harlan courthouse.
Wills Howard had heard, though, that little George Turner was following him, so he turned around and began following him. On August 4th, 1889, little George Turner was traveling near Sulphur Springs, Kentucky. Now, he'd stopped at a spring to get a drink of water when Wills came up on him, shooting him. George then fell and rolled behind a rock and returned fire, shooting Wills, badly wounding him in the thigh. Little George Turner lay dead of a gunshot to the head. Any thought of a truce died with little Bob. Soon, Kentucky Governor Simon Bolivar Buckner became deluged with letters from the eastern part of the state. That month, just about anybody and everybody in Harlan County wrote, begging the governor to call out the state militia to deal with the violence of the feud, or else no one was safe. And Rod, among those writing was Judge Lewis, whose next term of court was due to start, and jurors and witnesses were desperately needing protection. He called on the governor to send troops to Harlan County to protect the court, which he did on September 7th. Governor Buckner was careful to order the guard to only protect the courthouse and to not intervene in the Howard-Turner feud, as that, he said, was the duty of the local elected officials.
What a name for the Kentucky governor, Simon Bolivar. You know, a lot of people probably don't know. Where did that name come from, Steve? You've got to know.
Oh, that was Simon Bolivar. He was the freedom fighter that freed all the countries in South America from Spain.
Yeah, I remember a picture, and then every time I heard John Ward during football games in Tennessee, he would always announce Bolivar, Tennessee, is the way he would always announce it. So, well, those terms did not please Judge Lewis. He continued to write the governor to beg the state to take care of the Howards, but to no avail. That term of court was quiet. At the end of the term, the soldiers were withdrawn. Almost immediately after the soldiers left, you guessed it, folks, violence returned. On October 11th, 1889, a string of killings happened. John K. Wood, a relative of Judge Lewis, was shot and killed by ambush near his home east of Harlan. Hezekiah Hall, who was walking with him, was also killed.
A few miles away at almost the exact same time, Hiram K. Wood was shot. He died the next day. At another location, Stephen K. Wood was fired on but managed to escape. He rode into town to report the killings, and he also reported seeing Wills Howard, Will Jennings, and a group of 20 men in the neighborhood. The surviving members of the K. Wood family fled to the courthouse in Harlan. One of Howard's men, Charles Spurlock, was later tried in 1895 for the murder of John K. Wood and was acquitted. Well, in light of all this, Judge Lewis once again wrote Governor Buckner, begging him to send the troops back to Harlan, and once again, Governor Buckner refused to do so, again telling the judge it wasn't his job to do it. It was the responsibility of the Harlan County authorities to handle the matter. Wills Howard and Will Jennings, sensing they had the momentum, organized a group of 25 men and sent word that anyone in Harlan should immediately leave the town, as he and his men were planning to burn the town to the ground. When Judge Lewis heard this, well, Rod, he again contacted Governor Buckner, begging for him to return troops to Harlan to protect it. And again, Buckner refused, telling the judge that if the people of Harlan County wanted rid of the Howards, they'd have to do it themselves. He did, though, empower Lewis to organize a posse of up to 100 men.
Wow. Well, Lewis organized his posse, although, according to some sources and Wills Howard himself, he managed to get only 9 men to join. That's kind of pitiful. Well, this posse went after Wills Howard, and a gun battle ensued. 3 of the men were killed and 3 were wounded. The defeated men returned to the courthouse, which Lewis fortified in case of an attack by the Howards. He also took the time to pen yet another letter to the governor, begging for troops, and this time for the replacement of another judge in Harlan, Judge Boyd, who Lewis felt was on the Howard side.
And, Rod, again, Governor Buckner refused, telling Judge Lewis in harsh words that it was not the state's job to provide local police protection, but the county's. Meanwhile, Wills Howard and Will Jennings were assessing how things stood. For one thing, the sheriff was a Turner. For another thing, one of the judges was related to the Turners and was wanting to take over the whiskey trade in the county. Things did not look good. As the two were riding toward Harlan, Wills told Will,
"I'm tired of this. If we don't kill them, they're going to kill us. If we do kill them, we'll get sent to the pen. Lewis can always kill us and say he is enforcing the law. I say maybe we ought to leave for a while and let things just simmer down."
Well, they made plans to head out west until things settled down. So they turned around, went to their uncle's house, planning to leave the next day. Word about this soon got out, and some of the Turner men went down to the Howard house where they met Alice Howard, who in return met them with a rifle and told them to get off her property. She then rode to where Wills was to tell them that the Turner men had been at the house and had told her and her husband to join Wills when he left. Like the other meeting with his mother, this one also angered Wills Howard. So at dawn, he and Hezekiah Jennings rode into Harlan, and the two of them attacked the Turner home, where 16 of them were present having breakfast. Shots rang out, and Wills and Hezekiah thought someone was killed, either John or Alexander Bailey. They withdrew and headed back home.
The next day, Wills Howard and Will Jennings headed for the home of Judge Middleton to surrender for the killing of either John Bailey or Alexander Bailey, neither of whom was, well, actually dead. As they approached, they were ambushed by another Bailey, Pearl Bailey, not the singer, folks, but Pearl Bailey, who was shot and killed by Wills when he stood up to get a better shot. They continued on to the judge's house where they encountered Little George Turner and another man. Thinking Turner had a gun, Wills Howard fired at him, missed, killing the other man, John Bailey. Well, this time, he actually did kill Bailey.
Wills and Will decided that this would be a very good time to get out of Harlan County. They headed to Pineville. They caught a train headed west. They traveled from Pineville to St. Louis, then on to Kansas, Colorado, and New Mexico. Along the way, they got into a gunfight in which 7 Indians were killed. The two men split up, and Wills went back to St. Louis, where he robbed and killed a deaf man. He was arrested and charged with the man's murder, but skipped bail and headed back to Harlan County in March 1890.
A week later, Judge Lewis sent word to Wills that he should stay out of Harlan if he knew what was good for him. This, as we'd say now, just pissed Wills off. He sent word back to the good judge that he had just spent months traveling freely across the West, and he'd, by God, exercise similar freedom in Harlan County. He also added that if anybody tried to stop him from coming to town, he might just have to burn the place down. Well, that got Lewis's attention, because the judge raised yet another posse and came to the Howard's house to arrest Wills. They surrounded the house and tried to do, well, what Wills Howard had threatened to do to the town of Harlan: set it on fire.
They were unsuccessful, and, as you can imagine, a gun battle broke out. Wills charged out of the house, guns blazing, and drove 3 of the attackers into the river. 2 of Lewis's men were killed, and 5 were wounded, so the posse gave up the attack and returned to town. And Rod, as you have probably already guessed, Simon Bolivar Buckner received yet another letter in the mail from Harlan County. But it wasn't from whom you might be thinking. Wills Howard and Will Jennings are who penned this letter. And it's quite an interesting read, but we'll save you all the trouble of looking it up and just read it right now. My dear sir, we see from some of the Louisville papers that you have been asked to send troops up here in the mountains to capture us, and that the papers are full of slush about us being desperados, outlaws and thieves, murderers, cutthroats, and God knows what else. In justice to ourselves and to the thousands of friends in Harlan and the surrounding counties, we cannot afford to let such outrageous falsehoods go unnoticed. We will not pretend to give you a detailed account of the feud in this county, but it began as far back as the war. There was a crowd of people in this town who wanted to be supreme rulers, and when any stranger would come to town they did not like, they'd try to run him off or have him killed, and they did send many innocent men to their eternal home. We were selected by some unknown power to resist their attacks and became involved in the feud, and must bear the hardships we now bear, and must sneak around at night like a galley slave scourged to his dungeon. We're as anxious to give up and stand trial as men can be, but that would be like committing suicide, as old Judge Lewis and his crowd of bushwhackers of the Law and Order Party say that if they get us in jail, they intend to burn the jail, and we know they'll do it. They will give bail in the amount of $75,000 and can get 3/4 of the people in Harlan County to go on our bond. If we did give bond, we'd have to stay hid and would have somebody to fight all the time. They try to kill us just as hard then as now. One man can arrest both of us if we're guaranteed protection, but we will never give up to Judge Lewis and his bushwhackers. This is the kind of law and order party the devil has presiding in hell. No one has ever asked us to surrender, and no attempt was ever made to arrest us, but on occasion they have come and fired on us as they did this time, and then we'd fight and usually whip the hell out of them. Judge Lewis and his crowd slipped up to about 20 yards of where we were and fired on us, hitting one innocent boy by the name of Bird Spurlock, and then fled. Wilson Howard was the only one that fought them, and he whipped the entire 10 bushwhackers. If there had been one man in the party with the least bit of bravery or manhood, he could have killed Howard as he stood out open and sent the lead sailing into them as they ran like the cowardly curs they are. With reference to the people in this section, they are quite law-abiding people, are never molesting anyone. As there is a just God, they'll have to answer for the unjust assault made on these people, whose only fault is they let us stay amongst them. As to the charges they lay to us in Missouri, we desire to say that if Your Excellency will pardon us for the indictments in Harlan County against us, we assure you that we will come as fast as the first train can carry us. Judging from the papers, you may imagine that we have 40 or 50 men with us. This is not so. We are alone, living as best we can. About 3 weeks ago, Mr. Sam Cash of Clay County, the deputy collector for this district, was up here on business, and he saw the majority of the people in this county, and if you refer to him to tell you the sentiment of the people on this feud trouble. In closing, we beg your excellency to consider and inquire well into this matter, and you will soon find where the blame lies. Yours to command, Will Jennings, Wilson R. Howard.
Boy, that was a mouthful, Steve, and now I know where Kaz Walker got the idea. Let's just go and beat the hell out of him. Okay. Well, anyway, Judge Wilson Lewis did indeed pen his own letter to the governor. He asked, oh gosh, as always, for troops to get rid of that hated Howard gang. This time, Governor Buckner gave Lewis what he wanted. On March 17th, 1890, a company of militia arrived in Harlan along with General Sam Hill, who was to report to the governor on the situation on the ground. General Hill interviewed everyone who would like to talk to him about the situation. He also sent word to Wills Howard and Hezekiah Jennings that he wanted to meet with them, and they agreed, and the three meeting 12 miles out of town in the mountains away from Harlan Courthouse. Hill told Wills that he was there only to try to broker a peace and not to find anyone guilty. He also said that many folks in Harlan had spoken well of the Howard family. He urged Wills Howard to lay down the guns, and Wills told the general that he would not give up the arms first, but that if the Turners agreed to do so, and if Judge Lewis would apply the law equally to Turner and to Howard, he would agree to a ceasefire.
What the Sam Hill, Rod?
Yeah, I know. What the Sam Hill on this one?
General Hill got the same pledge from the Turners and soon left Harlan County thinking his job was done. A few weeks after the troops had left, Wills Howard and Will Jennings came up with a plan to end the threat from Judge Lewis once and for all. Wills placed several men in ambush spots all along the road to Hagen, Virginia. He then wrote a letter to Wilson Lewis, purportedly from the circuit judge of Hawkins County, Tennessee, in Rogersville. According to the letter, this judge had placed 2 men in jail in Rogersville, one possibly being the notorious Wilson Howard of Harlan, Kentucky, whom he was holding pending identification. Lewis got the letter and immediately made plans to take a posse to Rogersville and get Wills Howard. When George Turner found out about the letter, he felt something didn't smell right. He advised the judge not to go, but instead to send a rider on a fast horse to Rogersville by way of the Cumberland Gap instead of the road to Hagen. Lewis did as he was advised, and sure enough, the man returned to report that the judge in Hawkins County had no idea what he was talking about, and that Wills Howard was certainly not in the jail in Rogersville.
Wow. Well, Wills and Will figured that their little stunt was likely to ignite the feud all over again. So they again left Kentucky and headed west, where they split up. Wills Howard ended up in California, where he was arrested in June of 1893 for, of all things, robbing a Wells Fargo stagecoach. He was tried and sent to prison. There, he was identified and picked up by Mr. Imboden, who took him back to Missouri to stand trial for the murder of the deaf man, Mr. McMichaels. He was convicted and hanged for that murder, which we've told you about on a previous podcast episode. All you need to do is just go to the storiesofappalachia.com page, and you'll find that story. Well, they say time heals all wounds, and time did work to cool off the passions that fueled the Howard-Turner feud. By the First World War, the feud was spent.
But, Rod, it did leave one legacy, the term Bloody Harlan. It kind of fell out of vogue, and I don't think it really caught on that much. It was more the newspapers using the term Bloody Harlan, but it came back into fashion and became more accepted during the 1930s when the labor wars were going on over there. Mm-hmm. And so that's how we now call Harlan Bloody Harlan.
I remember guys that worked in radio at one time or another. You got to say, people in radio were a weird little bunch.
Yeah, I agree with you.
We're 2 of them right there. But anyway, there was one guy that worked in radio, and he said guaranteed he would always get him a job if he walked into the radio station. They say, "Where are you from?" He says, "Harlan, Bloody Harlan." And I was like, "Why? Why would you do that?" And he says, "Oh, they said take notice. Then at that point, they know that I'm the kind that'll be violent. If they do something wrong to me, I'll put them in their place." And I was like, "Oh, forget about it." But this whole story, though, one question I do have, and I see if you can answer this for me.
Okay.
Hagen, Virginia, that keeps on being referenced in this. Where was that at? I mean, I've never heard of Hagen, Virginia. Is it long since been forgotten about?
It is not what it used to be.
Okay.
The best I can tell, it is somewhere down between Jonesville and Pennington. It was a little town, and it still exists as a name up there.
Okay.
But I don't know that there are very many people that live there.
Yeah, you got me, because you got me thinking about this. And I kept on hearing Hagen. And I thought, that sounds familiar, but I really don't know what that is. And then I started thinking, okay, if you're that close to Harlan County and just over the border into Kentucky, into Virginia, then it's got to be somewhere in Lee County is the first thing that started popping into my head. But I started thinking, well, it's sort of like, somebody had put a picture up on Facebook the other day of, I think it was a church down in Bonnie Blue. And a lot of people don't even know where Bonnie Blue is at. That's, of course, over towards St. Charles, or what's left of St. Charles. But yeah, I just thought it was a unique name for a town. I'd never heard that before. It sounded familiar, but, I was like, where did that come from? So now I know.
Well, the best I can tell, you'd go out of Harlan down to Chevrolet.
Okay.
And then down to Kaywood and hang a right and go down some mountain roads, go through a pass that's over the mountains, and then come right down to the bottom, and that's where Hagen supposedly was.
Okay. Gosh, Kentucky has such unique names for little communities and little towns. You just mentioned one of them, Chevrolet, Meta, all these different names. Mousy, wow, what names and stuff. And you just tell them, yeah, you just cross over the hill and go past from Harlan into Chevrolet. And I'm like, Chevrolet? Oh, surely to goodness, that's not where they made all the Chevrolets at, but it's in Kentucky, though.
Well, folks, that's the story of the Howard Turner feud, another bit of the history of this place we call home. Thanks for listening. Now, be sure to subscribe to the Stories Podcast if you haven't done so already. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Good Pods, Audible, Stitcher, Radio Public, Player FM, iHeartRadio, or you can just find us on your favorite podcast app, whatever that happens to be. Now, we also have a YouTube channel where we tell other stories of Appalachia. Come take a look and subscribe to our channel if you like what you see. Until next we meet, y'all take care. So long, everybody.